Hi guys, Ashley here. Today I'm bringing you a phenomenal guest. He is Sean Shi from XPeng. In fact, today we're not talking about cars, we are talking about robotics. Sean, the first question is, when we think about XPeng, we think cars. And right now, one of the development areas of the company is going into robotics. In fact, in China, a lot of companies are running into robotics, the humanoid robots, the industrial robots. China, in fact, has more than 50% of the world industrial robots installed in their factories. But when it comes to industrial robot companies leading the world, China is still not there. With humanoids, we have great progress. So where is XPeng in this environment, and where are we taking robotics?
Actually, XPeng started robotics development very early, like in 2018. First, we developed the robot with 4 legs, and then we moved to when we realized that the robot creates the values with the hands. So we moved to develop the hand, and then now we only produce the robot, which is humanoid robot. We started very early, and also we already gained a lot of technology in that area. Right now, actually, we share the technology between the cars and the robots in AI, in manufacturing, in other, actuator technologies. So we find it may be more efficient when a car producer can produce a robot.
Is it becoming cheaper like this, or is there any other technology transfer? Because we know that a lot of humanoid robots, let's say in the West, right, cost more than $100,000.
Yes.
So how cheaply can we now produce them?
Well, from my point of view, it's too early to say we make it cheaper because yes, we can make it cheaper right now. As in China, we have a full supply chain in around this area. We are able to make cheap robot, but right now we are focusing on the ability of the robot to make it stable, to make it powerful, to make it actually useful in the scenario, in the real world scenario. And next step, we will make it cheaper, which is very easier.
And when it comes to robot being useful, what does it mean? I mean, we've all seen I Show Speed in China for 4 weeks, and he was doing, dance with a robot. And then there was the robot car, and, he showed you how to extinguish a fire. But what does it mean? When I'm in Shanghai, sometimes I see people that bought a Unit 3 robot for $16,000 and the robot just walks behind them carrying a bag. And it's more like a fad. It's something cool to have, but it's quite useless.
Yes. Well, this is about how the robot industry developed, because in the early stage, we are focusing on how to make the robot move. Then you will see a lot of robots moving and also dancing, something like that, jumping, something like that. Yes, that's because when the robot is not moving, it's like industrial arm. It can only finish the work that pre-programmed. But now, especially the humanoid robot, well, the humanoid robot is addressing the general problems, which means that it can actually do human tasks in the real world. So besides the moving ability, we are more focusing on the manipulation. Actually, the robots, as I said, the robot creates the values with the hands. It is able to move, but move is not not there. We have to make it finish the work. So the robot finish the work with the hands. So XPeng is still, we can make the robot dance, but this is not a point. We need a robot not only dance. Well, it has the ability to dance, but we create not for the dancing. Right now, we focus on 3 scenarios. One is for the factory to make it useful, which means that you are able to use the humanoid robot in the production line, to use the screwdriver to put the parts together, to move the parts from place to place. So this is our main focus right now. And then in next year, we will plan to deploy the robot in many other places. For example, our headquarters buildings, in the reception, and also the global stores, serving people, say hi, or something like that. So this is our focus, which is make the product useful in the real world, rather than to just jumping, dancing, something like that.
And there has been some successes. Right now, there's a few robots that are already installed in some car manufacturing
Yes.
scenarios, right? And they are planning. So when we manufacture a car, a majority of the work already, 70%, is done by robotic arms. And then the 30% is done by people because, as you said, it's delicate work to put things together.
Yes.
So the plan by a lot of industry insiders is to out of this 30%, basically 20% will be done by robots and only 10% will be left for the people. So a lot of fears arise in that respect,
Right.
where people say, okay, now robots are coming and they're going to take away the jobs. And especially in a place like China, where a lot of people are employed in the manufacturing sector, this could be a problem. So what is your response to that?
Well, actually, our factory and even Xiaopeng is we are facing difficulty to looking for people that can work in the production line. People will come and go. Even in China, you're still facing difficulty to looking for these kind of workers. Let's say. Well, the coming of humanoid robot is supporting people to do work easier or more efficient rather than replace them, I think. They can do more work like people cannot do, or they can control or cooperate with the robot to make the work easier rather than replace, I think.
And what is your vision of, let's say, the next 10, 15 years where the world will become a blend of organics and non-organics collaborating in the research, in the workspace, collaborating in day-to-day life? Because, again, there are a lot of movies that show us that it can go very nicely, it can go very wrong. There are a lot of fears that people generally have, and the question still remains: if the robot can do receptionist job, for say, right? You're not going to have a human and a robot sitting there collaborating on the task that will be completed better by somebody who is available 24 hours, knows all the history, can recognize me as Ashley when I come into the building, can have a personal agenda already in the head, etc. So, what is your vision, in other words, for that reality where the organics and non-organics coexist? And I know that you're optimistic, so it is going to be an interesting development.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic, but it's very hard to foresee this kind of situation in like 10 years before the large model appears and prove that it's working. People in humanoid robot industry, they still have the doubts that if the humanoid robot is actually the future, or if the robot has to be the humanoid shape. But in that times, actually, we are not able to address the multitask. The robot is not for general purpose. The cleaning robot it can only clean the floor. It cannot cook the food for you, something like that. But because of the software developer, which means the large model or large language model, we proved that there's maybe a way that we can make the task generalization could be happen in a few days. So in the recent 3 to 5 years, people more and more believe that humanoid robot could be a direction, one of the direction, let's say. But right now, I think from the technology point of view, maybe humanoid robot could be the only solution for now. Because like the autonomous driving, before we program the rules, we control the car based on the rules, and we have to create millions of the rules with human actually. So the car doesn't really appear very smart. Right now we use the data to train the AI or the cars. This is the important point for humanoid robot as well, which means we don't have to create a program for the humanoid robot. We only need data to train the robot. Today, if you have the data of the cooking in the house, then the robot will learn how to cook. Then next day, you have the data in the production line. Then the robot can work in the production line in future. So, which means that data is appear to be very, very important. But in the real world, when we collect the data, well, it has to be the human. You don't have other life can work like human. which means you have to create the robot very much human-like to use the data, rather than the robot with four legs. It's quite important to make the robot actually useful.
I think that that's a very interesting way to look at it. Basically, the data we're collecting about interaction with this real world is all coming from humans. Humans have two arms and two legs and two eyes and certain awareness and capabilities. So if we are training a robot on this data, it needs to be also as capable as the human, and later on it might expand from there. One thing that you've mentioned was the brains, right? So robots are not just somebody who can mimic your movements and do the flips and be strong and can run faster than you. Robot is someone who is, as we said, smart, is following the AI wave. So in that respect, because one of the things that I know your company is also focusing on is AI plus. So are you, as the hardware primarily company, also developing your own AI models, LLM models, or is the collaboration inside? Because a few, let's say a year back, all the large companies, and up to today, right, we have Baidu, we have Alibaba, we have ByteDance, we have even Ping An has their own LLM. Some of them are a lot more successful, others less, but everybody was trying to build their own proprietary algorithms and systems. And suddenly today we see more and more also even government, let's say, initiatives integrating, for instance, DeepSeek. We see even large ecosystems coming and saying, hey, there's DeepSeek, there's Manus, there's a lot of things going on. So what is your route and how do you see this particular area?
I think this is because people need a certain model for different use. For Baidu, for Alibaba, they are using the model to provide the service on the internet. But for the cars, they also need models. But these large models work in the driving scenarios. We also need the large models to control the robot, to learn how to finish the tasks. Yes, we need our own models because we don't have to make a full size of the model on the robot. We need some of key component of the model, and to make it efficient in the local robot. So that's why we need that. But for now, I think our focus is still on how to make the body work efficiently. So in future, we might develop our own model. We already have our own chips. We make the chips more efficient to work with the certain large models.
Talking about chips, maybe two-part question. First of all, when it comes to robotics development, flying cars and the whole push for a little bit of cyberpunk future, China is ahead in the world. How do you see implementation of this technology in China? Because the typical model is we choose a few cities, a few provinces, we hardcore implement, let's say, humanoid robots in a variety of fields. We test what works, and then we scale it across the country. Do you think this is going to continue? Do you think, given that, the consumer sentiment is a little bit low, the economy is not recovering as fast as possible, the government will still want to push for humanoid robots that, again, as we said, might or might not disrupt some of the working processes and livelihoods of people? Do you think they will still stand behind implementation and real-life testing of this technology in China? That's probably question number one, and then we'll talk about chips as well.
I think especially in a humanoid robot or robot itself, people cannot stop this kind of trend. We have to accept it. Even there's some situation in the economy, but maybe robots could be another option to solve the problem. Might be. Yes, the technology is still evolving. As Elon said, that you cannot accept it or not. It is coming. So I think in China, we gain more support from the government, from the key enterprises. We are happy to see new people here, new product, new robot here. We are willing to test it, to use it even it is not very efficient right now. We are willing to develop it in China. So I think the situation in China is very, very good.
And do you believe that China will be the first real testing ground?
I think it's already
mass robot
is
already. So you think that trajectory will continue?
Yes.
And what about China plus. So what would be the next market? Because looking at the current situation, it looks very unlikely that it's going to be, let's say, the United States or Europe or, some of the other countries. And maybe places like Southeast Asia are a lot more receptive to some of this technology and thoughts. But again, they have population that is involved potentially in the sectors that could be disrupted earliest. So what is your idea about China plus?
Actually, right now we're still focusing on China for now, and especially we are focusing on the scenario within our company for now. So it's a bit early to see that which country we will move to or something like that. Yeah, we're still focusing on how we solve the problems in the production line in different scenarios. Yeah, let's see.
And when it comes to those biggest problems, we were speaking about chips very briefly previously. Do you think the chips are the core challenge right now? Because you said you have your own chips developed for, robots. Are they good enough for what we're trying to do? Are the chips developing the speed of, innovation significantly increasing, improving? Or are we still limited because some of the best chips in the world are not available in the market at the scale that they are needed at this moment? So is this, in other words, the biggest problem, or how big the problem is the chips, and what other problems are we facing right now that are constraining the growth?
Well, this is kind of a limitation in chips production, but I think the most problem right now is not chips itself. We have the options to use different chips, but to balance between the consumption, the computing powers, or other to cooperate with the robot hardware itself is the most important point. So right now we're focusing on that, and in future we believe that once the robot can work very efficiently, it can work with different chips at the same time.
When it comes to the hardware itself, how long do you think it will be, in your experience being in the field, before hardware is at a state when we say it's ready for almost anything? Right, because we've seen the guys, you poke him a little bit, he falls. We've seen Shenzhen police and a couple of police applications across the country where the robot walks in a police outfit and 3 police people try to support it because if the wind blows, it's going to be a very expensive disaster. So how far away are we?
We will see it in different aspects. For the hardware, I think it's not very long time. For now, actually, we will release our new robot this year. And next year, we will have like thousands of robots produced. So for the hardware, I think in 2 or 3 years, we will have very stable, very efficient hardware. But, solve the problems in the real world is not only the hardware. The key is the AI level, the maturity of the software. So for the software, maybe in 3 or 5 years, we can basically solve the problems in the production line, in the very simple tasks in the reception.
Closed environment.
Yeah, something like that. Well, in like 5 to 10 years, we will see some robot enter the home for the housekeeping. Yes.
And do you also see robots developing beyond that? For example, China and the rest of the world are actually aging very fast.
Yes.
And healthcare is one of the important sectors to address, and potentially use of robots, especially humanoid robots, right? To support the elderly, to accompany them would be important. So do you think that at what time do you believe that there will be an employee, proper employee who is mobile, not just sitting at the reception and welcome people, but who is mobile and can take up a role more or less plus minus of a human would be possible?
Let's say 10 years.
Also 10 years.
Like that. Yeah. This is, taking care of people is more difficult than to do some housekeeping, because when we interact with human, we have to make sure it's safe, it's soft to rather harm human. So it will experiencing the product used in the industrial use in the business environment, something like that. And after that, we will make it safer and safer, and also more intelligence. Then we will take care of people at home.
Very good. And you've mentioned safety. It is so important when we implement any new technology at a large scale to look at safety. And right now, especially the global community, I think maybe in China it's a slightly less vocal topic, but the global community is very afraid, of not just what's going to happen with AI, how AI can run amok, but also with, for example, self-driving cars or vehicles, right? So who is responsible? What are some of the regulations? What are the ways that we handle when somebody gets hurt? So now imagine a scenario when we have humanoid robots out there and also, somebody can get hurt. So in other words, what kind of regulations or what kind of steps are we taking now, not only in China, but maybe as humanity, as the global community, to regulate, to foresee, and to agree on some foundational basis for this technology to be applied in masses?
Well, there are many departments in the government is actually working on that. But right now, you don't even have a product that in the market. So they are still working on that. But well, when you see a lot of product in the market, well, there have to be some regulations for that, and even it will creating different business in that area, like insurance or something like that. But now we still don't have this kind of product, so it's early to say that. But it has to expand the insurance ways to maintain this kind of situation. I think the government will do that.
Step in.
Yes, like the flying cars. We already have some regulations in flying car. In like 3-5 years, maybe we'll have the regulations for the humanoid robot.
So, but at this stage, it's up to the company to introduce some of the breaks and some of its own kind of rules, premeditating what could go wrong and how is it going to be solved.
Yes. And it's also depending on how fast the technology is developing. Because the first human robots appeared in like 20 years ago. In the past 15 years, actually, we don't have very much developed technology ready for the robot. But the large language model actually accelerate this industry. So this actually depending on how fast in future the technology is developing. Yes.
And the last question for you.
Yeah.
What is one question I should have asked you today, but I have not asked you yet?
Okay.
So what is one question you think we shall talk about?
For me, normally when we talk to our friends or customers or the users, we are curious that when you have a robot, which scenario or which ability you hope the robot can do for you. Normally, we'll get different answers for that, which means, this is our key work right now as well. Looking for a suitable scenario for the robot to test it, to use it, to develop the technology. Normally, we'll get different answers for that. So this is actually, I want to ask you about that because this may lead us to in the short term, different direction to go. Because we choose the production line for our first scenario is because when you produce a robot, it's very hard to have a real world situation work with the robot. But we can do it in Xiaopeng. It is easy for us. Then we choose the production line as the Tesla is doing as well. But if you have other scenario that can work with, you can train a robot, can work with the robot. I think it's good and it's very, very important to robot development. So I think the question is interesting and could be different to different people. Yes,
absolutely. And guys, this is all for today. We have spoken with Sean today about robots. He's working with Xiaopeng, and right now China is clearly very much focused in the building future where organics and non-organics come together. As we've heard from the expert, in the next 10 years, we're going to see not only robots dancing and taking up some of the receptionist duties, but also entering professional fields. So it's a very exciting and also for a lot of people worrying development, but according again to professionals, and I think, again, consensus is not quite there, but you can choose to be part of this movement. The train has departed. You either go with the flow on the train and try to steer it, and then you choose to be optimistic and productive about it. so that the jobs are actually complementing and robots are complementing people, or you can choose fear and, be unproductive about it and try to go against the big flow, which very rarely in the experience of the world works. Thank you so much for being with us today, and we're going to chat again soon. Cheers.